Why? I mean, why? I just don't understand why this is here. You only get one chance to make a first impression. And today we're looking at the Monopigmented set by Rosa Gallery. These are a paint that is made in the Ukraine. Get the blue tin. I like that. I don't have blue on yet. Now mine is a little damaged right there. See, there's like dented. Yeah, it's affecting the ability to close a little bit, but I'll have to see if I can tweak the tin and mess with that just a little bit and see if we can adjust it. What I'm going to do is I am going to take these out. I will probably rearrange these in an order that I prefer. I don't usually tend to start with my yellows. You have to let me know, what color do you start with when you are setting up a palette? I tend to start with my reds, my warm reds, move into my cooler reds, then transition over to blue, then to my greens, through my yellows, into my browns, and if there was a black, I would end with black. That just is a way that seems, it just works for my brain. We all do them differently, I'm sure. So drop me a comment. I'm really looking forward to finding out, how do you set up your palette? What colors do you start with? Yellows, reds, maybe you start with blues. Let me know. Okay, so I've rearranged my colors. Starting with the white, I've transitioned through the warm reds. I brought English red up here. They had it down with the browns. It's fine wherever you like to put it. I'm just bringing it up here to the reds so that I kind of have everything in rows. Like my blues and my greens are here, my yellows start a row, and I don't have one color on one row and then finishing on another, if that makes sense. So starting with the white, through the warm reds, getting into the cool reds, then we have our magenta rose, our violet. And I like to work my palettes when they're palette, like this, like that go in the rails and the metal tins. I like to work it in a serpentine fashion so that the color that's here in one row is similar to this. It just works. For me, it works. I mean, this is not going to be similar to this, but these will be. I could have reversed this, but it's just the way I like to do it. Through my magenta, violet, into my blues, then my blues that are leaning towards red, and then my blues that start to lean towards green, into my greens, into my yellows, and then from the yellows I transition into like my burnt sienna and my browns, and that's how I do it. So to start with, we're going to open all of these up. I will do that quickly off camera. One of the first thing I notice is the whole pans are tapered on their corners. And on the bottom, it says Rosa. Now, the labels have the color on one end and the pigment on the other, and they are perforated. So what I'm going to do is when I take these off, I'm going to leave the tabs that have the information on the pans so that I don't have to write it on every one, because normally I write it all out. And just so that you can compare, this is a standard traditional whole pan or faux pan. And these are just slightly narrower. You can see the edge there. This is flush on this side. So you can see a traditional faux pan is just slightly wider. As far as width goes, let me just put this, because these are tapered. I'll turn it sideways so you can see. See, they do have a taper to them. They taper down. Whereas the faux pans I have it's a little bit less of a taper. So you can see they're just slightly narrower. But all in all, height-wise, there's your height-wise. So you have pretty close to what is in a traditional faux pan in these colors. So let me go ahead and take these labels off. and let's swatch them and see how these colors look. They actually have like little paper here to keep, the label is all sticky, but they actually have little papers that go between that stickiness and your pan of paint to protect them. And I just used my craft knife once I lifted one edge and sliced through. I'll show you on one more, but then I'm going to go ahead and do them off screen. Now, if you wanted to, you could save these and put the little color, because it's supposed to be resemblant of the color on the top sticker. You could put those on your swatch sheet if you want to. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do that or not. But the way that I did that last one is I just took and I peeled up the edges. And like I said, they are perforated, so it came off pretty easily. It looks like a lot of thought went into designing these labels. And I just kind of ran my craft knife along the perforations, just so that I would get a nice clean separation there. It comes right off. Okay, so let me open the rest of these and we'll continue. My colors are finally all unwrapped, put back into the palette, and it's time to swatch them. Now, I want to find out, I'm not going to pre-wet these. A lot of times I will take like my little spritz bottle and give them just a priming. I'm not going to do that because I want to see how easily do these re-wet. And I'm going to start, I did include the white because I want to kind of go put that down and see just how opaque it is or isn't. And then I'm going to swatch the rest of these out. Now, I want to do this as an overall review, not necessarily just a swatching video. So I'm not going to sit here and swatch each one individually out of respect for your time. Now, maybe you're someone who likes to see swatches, and if you are, drop me a comment and let me know. It's very helpful to hear back from you, my audience, as to what you like. So definitely drop me a comment if seeing all the colors actually go down individually is something you like. Maybe I'll do more actual swatching, full out swatching videos in the future. But for today, I want to do an overall review of these. So I'm also going to be painting with them. So in the interest of your time, I'm going to swatch out a couple and then I'm going to speed this up. And if there's any reason that I need to stop in that process to share some thoughts with you, of course I will do so. But otherwise, I'm just going to get to swatching these colors. And I will say that this palette, mine received damage in shipment to me. And my color right here, this is the, just green, number 711, was actually cracked. This originally was over here on this side when it was shipped. And you'll notice that's right where the damage occurred to my palette. So, it's still, I've got it to close a little bit better, just by, it keeps wanting to pop open. I had to do a little tweaking. I mean, it's not a reason, there's so much waste and it's disappointing. But I don't think it's something that I would say, oh, I'm going to return this because this doesn't work. I can take steps to keep this closed if I needed to in the future. I can also kind of bend that because I see it's bent inwards right here. You can actually see right there on the palette, it bends in. So I'm going to try to straighten a little bit of that out and see if I can't fix the palette. This is the way that I chose to arrange my colors. I did say I like to start with reds. And I did move PR 101 English red up here in my reds. And where might I have placed that? Kind of down here between the burnt sienna, which is also PR 101, and then the burnt umber, which is a PBR 7. I might have put it right here, which may be where it was originally. I don't even remember. But just to say, the way I did it, see how all my yellows are on this line and all my greens and my blues are on this line. That is the only reason that I chose to move that one, was just to kind of keep my other colors that I wanted together. All right, let's get some swatching done. I may just take this whole piece right off. I've done that on some of my other palettes. I don't know if this palette will bead up yet or not. I haven't tried it. If it does bead, then most likely when I use these colors, I would use a ceramic palette for mixing. in which case I wouldn't even need this on here for the mixing space, and I would just take it off. I save those, and then if I go out somewhere, when I need to have that back intact, if you would, then I would just like grab the piece. This is from another palette, and the little wire. And it's very easy, to slide those back in and put them back together. So yeah, it may be something I do. I don't know. Undecided at this point. Let me just grab a brush. And I have my Princeton Neptune size 10 round here. And I just want to see how well, and that re-wets very easily. Just going to go ahead, place some of that. So I'm just kind of building up what would be my mass tone at this one side. So I just want to see when that dries, just how well is it going to cover that line. Grab my rag here. And I just wiped that white off on that so that I could try not to dirty my water so quickly. Now I decided to wet my paper first because I want to see how are these going to move. You can see there that the shine comes all the way over to about here. I want to see how is this going to move in my water when I paint with these. And then what I might do down here at the bottom is just sort of grab a little bit of this and pull it out so I can see that more diluted wash, what's it going to do. But up here would give me a good guess as to how it's going to move. And then this will give me a good variation in the wash. So I think that's how I will continue to swatch these as I go along. Let's just take a quick look at these pans, because I realized as I was swatching them, some of these came a bit fuller than others. There was some variation, like this green, for example. You can see how it is like dipped down, that kind of indentation. Whereas this like cobalt turquoise was very full, like right to the top full. There are a few others which are not as full as others. So this one again, you see that kind of divot in the pan, and I'm sure that that has to do with some of its drying and shrinking. Some of these re-wet much easier than others. The umbers gave me a harder time re-wetting. Some were very easy. As you saw in the swatches, some wanted to just take off, where others I put it down and they just kind of stayed put. And that again, I think, has got more to do with the pigment and how it normally reacts in water versus the overall the paints as a whole. But yeah, I just wanted to share that because I was noticing like some of these were really well full, like this yellow here, the turquoise, our PR 101. This one was the English red. That one was very full, but then there were some like this chromium oxide, a couple of the umber and the burnt sienna that weren't quite as full. This cad red medium, also one that was quite a divot in the pan, as it shrunk down and pulled in. I mean, you can see the reflection there. That pan really sinks in the center. I don't think there's any other way that I can really show that to you, trying to like tip them so that you can see the differences there in some of these pans versus others. But there's definitely fluctuation in how full some of them are in comparison. I'm fine with the pans. That's not a complaint. It's just an observation that I, wanted to share. Overall, though, most of them re-wet very nicely. The cobalts were a little harder to re-wet. The umbers were harder to re-wet. I don't know if you could tell there with it being sped up as I did the swatches, which ones took more to re-wet or not. But then there were others that were just very, very easy to re-wet, and some that took off when they touched the water. For example, the magenta rose. Wow, was that like an explosion of color? That one I think moved and reacted the most. The green did some reacting, and I think some of them were so interesting in how they reacted. If we take a quick look back at the swatch, they're almost like the way that they kind of take off and like vein out in their movements, like here in the PR 101. This is the English red. You see this one here on that green. And then others, the granulation. Colors that said they were granulating, like the chromium oxide, had some beautiful granulation. What I did was I took those colors and I re-swatched the granulating colors at the bottom for you, because I wanted to get a better look at that. And they're not quite dry yet, so I'm going to wait till they fully dry. I had to grab a separate piece of paper because there were a few that didn't say granulating, but like this one here, the umber, for example, that one didn't say granulating. It had an N versus the G. But right here, the PBR7 said it was granulating. This one, the PBR7, didn't say a granulating color, but I figured it's the same pigment and it most likely has similar properties. Let's swatch it out and see, because I was seeing some granulation happening here in the initial swatch. So I wanted to take a better look at that. And then I grabbed another piece of paper of the exact same paper. This is that B watercolor paper, not the 100% cotton one. This is the cellulose one. And I wanted to see how they reacted. And one of them that I did on that paper is, if you look here on my ultramarine, there was a lot of ultramarine pigment in that wash, and I wasn't seeing the granulating that I was expecting in this wash. So I did it one more time with more water, less pigment, and that's where it really shined. That is where the granulation really presented itself so beautifully. And then this here was the sienna, because PR 101, the English red, said it was granulating. And then when it came to the burnt sienna here, that one didn't have the G for granulating. So I wanted to kind of swatch that out and compare and see, in a nice wet wash, will we get some granulation? And I think you see around those edges that the answer is yes. We definitely do still get some in there, even though Rosa hasn't noted a G on the packaging for granulation, granulating color. There's some thoughts on the swatching. Let's paint something with these. there's a couple more things I want to look at when reviewing these paints. I've placed down here just a few swatches of color. I'm going to let these dry, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to glaze over these. And why is that important? This is going to be important because if I am painting, if I'm creating a painting that's going to have multiple layers, I definitely want to know, can I layer these paints up without disturbing the layer below? But I'm going to give them time to dry naturally on their own, as I would if I was actually creating a painting. When I did the lighthouse painting, I painted the background and I let that set overnight and then came back. When I put this in here, I then waited a good portion of the day before I had actually come back to it. Like I stopped and went and had something to eat and just let this dry very naturally on its own. Same with stuff in here before I came back in with other layers. Now, I will say that when I did like in here, I noticed that, I used to have white that kind of streamed down these rocks, and I was really very easy to reactivate these things. So that's what made me curious is to how will they layer, from one level on top of another. Can I do it without reactivating them? Or are they going to reactivate more easily like I would expect from, say, a gouache? It has been a couple days since I put down these swatches of color. These are definitely very dry. The next thing I want to do is see how do these colors glaze. If we're doing a painting with these and we want to come back in with layer number 2, are the base, the first layer, are they going to stay put like a lot of other professional brands, or are they going to move? Usually if we completely let our first layer dry or our under layers dry, as long as we come back and we're not doing a lot of brushwork or really scrubbing, that paint tends to stay put. You will have some reactivation, of course, but generally speaking, our paint will stay put. So now I'm going to create a little mix of yellow. I have to treat this palette because I don't like the beading. Here we go. I just want to make some yellow that I can wash over like these 2 colors. So dry paper, dry paint. Again, it's been a couple days that this base has been drying. So let's see what we can do. Let me paint. Look at how much the red pulled out. It immediately started to reactivate that red. Look down here where I started and look where it finished. Let's try a creamier mixture. I'm curious. So more paint, right? More pigment, less water. And I'm using a Princeton Neptune brush. So this is, if you've ever used a Princeton Neptune, this is the softest brush I own. The brush itself is not going to contribute to reactivating that layer below it. I should be able to come across very lightly. And that ended up a lot cleaner than this. So more water, less paint. That water reactivated really, look, you can see, let me bring this closer for you to see. That water reactivated. See that red pulling down into the wash now? That's really reactivating the paint below it. But you can see here, more paint, less water. That kind of glazed over the top without pulling that orange up into it up here. Now, this, more paint, less water. That yellow is more opaque than transparent. I'll try it with another. I'll try it with another color. Maybe we'll try it with a red that is nice and transparent on the blue and see if we get a purplish color, a color that is purplish. Looking at my large swatch here, this red, actually both reds, are really pretty transparent. But the carmine is definitely, you can really see that black line right through it. So I think I'm going to grab the carmine and we're going to go over this. And we're going to try that. I'm going to do the same thing. First, we'll just create a mixture that has more water. Okay. And we're going to, just with that very wet wash. Again, I'm immediately seeing that blue, sorry, it's kind of off screen. I'm immediately seeing that blue pull up into the red. It's very clean down here right now, and you can see the blue in that wash at the top, much like what happened with our yellow. So now, just the same as I did before, I'm going to do it down here. We're going to add more pigment into our mix. Make this a thicker paint. Okay. And let's go right here at the bottom. Again, when that paint is thicker, I'm not seeing it pull through so much. I'm not seeing it activate. So it's kind of like the thick over thin, almost like we would do with wash. That's very, look at how much the blue has reactivated and is pulling into that. Makes me want to try a comparison. Let me see if I can find a couple colors that are very similar. See if we can compare so that I can really show you what it is that I'm thinking and why this is bothering me a little bit. I've grabbed my Winsor Newton Professional paints, and looking at these colors, I'm going to choose the Permanent Rose, the Winsor Blue, and then Winsor Lemon for my equivalents. And I'm going to swatch out a red and a blue circle here. Now I do want to note that while they are close, the Winsor Lemon and the Cad Yellow Light, which is the yellow that I just used to mix, those are different. The Cad Yellow Light is PY35 in Rosa, and the Winsor Lemon is PY175. So not the same pigment, but the hues are very close. And again, with the Permanent Rose by Winsor Newton is PV19 and Carmine is PR170:1. The hues are very similar, but it's not the same pigment. When we get to our bright blue and our Winsor Blue, those are both a PB15, but I just wanted to make sure that that was like clear. While the hues look very similar, the pigments are different. But I don't think that's going to have as much of an impact on the fact that once I put the paint down and it dries, am I able to glaze over with another color without any issues of reactivating what was below it to be able to get a nice glaze? Now, I'm sure if I scrubbed something, I'm going to reactivate. It's watercolor. I'm going to reactivate what's underneath. However, with just a quick wash like that, usually you can glaze over something and the colors will kind of set on top of each other versus, well, bleeding out like this. But let's just give it a try. All right, for starters, I need to take my Permanent Rose and we're going to put that down just like I did the first time. And now one variable that will not be the same is I'm not going to wait a couple more days for this to dry and then come back. So I will be using a heat tool to dry this. If anything, I think that would lead to this reactivating a little easier versus the one that's dried for a couple days. And then we need our Winsor Blue. like this one. All right, I'm gonna let those dry, and then we're gonna come back with the permanent rose to glaze over here and the Windsor lemon to glaze over here, just like I did at the top. So I have these dried, and the one thing that I will say is, of course, you don't get as nice of a wash when you use your heat tool. Your heat tool is going to cause it to dry differently. I probably have more pigment sitting on the outside than I would have had I just let this dry on its own. It would have been a nice, probably dried like a nice even wash. That said, it's going to leave more pigment on the outsides, and you know, these are different variables that could lead to it picking up more pigment and kind of pulling it off to the outside. I don't know. Will it do it? We're going to find out here in just a second. But these are variables I wanted to mention because, you know, that could possibly be a flaw in my experiment. And aside from the fact that there's a human being doing the experiment, that's flaw in itself. All right. To start with, I'm going to, just like before, mix up a wet wash with my yellow. I've made my water dirty so fast. Okay, so a nice wet wash. I'm not going to mix up too much because I want to be able to mix my red in this same container. But still a very wet wash, just like we did here. And I'm just going to come through. I did pull a little bit of that red up in there. Again, I didn't have to press very hard. I did not press very hard to put that on top. We will see how that does. And then let's go with a much creamier mixture of paint and that right there. Again, nice and clean like we got here. We're just going to kind of let that do its thing. And I will mix up my red. All right, so going back to my permanent rose. First thing we're going to do is mix up a nice wet wash of that. So this is like very thin, like tea. That did not pull the color through. Now, like I said, there was a lot of pigment in the outside edge of this, but already with what I am seeing, it's still a cleaner wash than this was. And again, we're going to let that dry and see what we actually end up with before we, give it more thoughts. Now let's make us creamier mixture. All right, definitely more pigment than water. And I'm just going to let that set. Prince and Neptune is such a soft brush, and you see, like I skipped along a little bit there, but I didn't want to go back over it because we just did a single swipe on each of the others, trying to keep it as consistent as possible. Now, I let these pretty much dry on their own. I'm going to allow these to mingle. Already, though, look how much cleaner this is when I've glazed the color over versus this. You can see how much this paint underneath reactivated and mixed in with the wash on top. Same here. You can actually, this is turning to be like a purple or magenta like color out into that wash, whereas down here, it's not. Our thicker, when we use the paint thicker, it's not moving. Here, when we use the paint thicker, it's not moving either. However, I think we're going to see that this yellow is much more transparent than this yellow. And that's because of the pigment, which is why I felt the need to say the pigments were not the same in the yellow or the red, which can absolutely also make a difference. This is setting more on top. We're seeing much more of the yellow versus it just being, I think when this dries, this is going to blend in much better. We may see these darker spots right here remain and not be as transparent as it dries. That's possible. But already here on the edges, as this is drying, look at how much that's becoming purple versus having the red on top. Here we can definitely see that purple, the glazing effect of having that red over that blue. So what does that mean? You're like, Angela, why the heck is this important? Why this is important to me, and I would have to do a painting with multiple layers and really dive into this. But my first impression is if it's doing this, I may not want to choose these paints for a painting that I know is going to have multiple layers to it. Now, if we look at the painting that I did, this was a lot of wet and wet washes. It worked beautifully for those wet and wet washes. I loved it. This might have me thinking, well, if I'm going to do multiple layers, I should go into it knowing that my subsequent layers will need to keep being thicker, and kind of treating the Rosa Gallery paints similar to how I would treat if I was my painting if I was painting it with gouache. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that. If you've used Rosa a lot and find that no, it's actually not a problem when you're painting, I would love your feedback. Drop me a comment below, because this is, again, just a first impression of the Rosa Gallery paints. Of course, I'm going to be using them to do some paintings with in the future, but just first impressions, I'm kind of questioning this. So let me let these finish drying. We'll come back and take another look and see what we think from there. These are now dry. My thoughts are, especially like with these, I used a heat tool to dry them. Had I let them dry for a couple hours like I would have if I were doing a regular painting, at that stage, when my first layer is done, I'm going to let it completely dry naturally on its own. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to go have lunch, get a cup of coffee, something, finish my work for the day, come back to it in the morning. I'm going to give it to the time to dry on its own. I think if I had done that, I probably wouldn't even have much of this that pulled through at all. I think it would have glazed very nicely. Now, that said, I did let these dry. These dried for a couple days. I was not expecting how easy they were to reactivate. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's good to know. It's good to know if the paints that you're using are going to reactivate like this or not. And this, which also could be the paper, this is not cotton paper, this is the cellulose paper. See the back run of the bloom that it caused there. And again, I don't want to say that the paints are prone to that, because the paper has a lot to do with it. So we're going to just ignore that little part. These edges really pulled the color. Now, if I'm only glazing it in the spot, like if I wasn't carrying it beyond, that might not matter, right? It might not matter. That's something that would vary by painting, right? So the Winsor & Newton, and I'm suspecting, like I know my Daniel Smith paints do as well. I haven't done this type of test with Core, so I can't speak to that, or other brands. But just looking at the Rosa paints, wet and wet, oh, they're beautiful. I I really like them. They re-wet so easily. You do not need to prime these paints. You can just, you know, get in there and go. You saw that when we did the swatching. And so we do have all of the colors here swatched out that are in this palette, with some of our granulating colors pulled and done larger down here below, because again, I love granulating colors. I love to paint landscapes, and I think they lend themselves so well when used in landscapes. I did also paint a quick little swatch card that I'm going to keep in my palette so that I can quickly just look at my colors and know which ones I want while I'm painting. So I will put pigment numbers on these. I may write the pigment number and the name. I find that if you do that, each time you swatch a brand, if you write the name and the pigment number, you will start to, your brain will just start to learn and associate, oh, burnt sienna, it's either PR 101 or PBR 7. Some brands, it's multi-pigmented. I don't tend to like those, but regardless. And you'll just know, I'd be working with one of these. And that might tell you, oh, well, if I use this one, this burnt sienna that is made with a PBR 101, and I mix that with my ultramarine blue, I'm going to get a gorgeous gray. You'll start to learn how to mix better. So that's, you know, again, my 2 cents on why it might be beneficial to also put pigment numbers down. I know there's a lot of people that, one, don't understand them. They find them very confusing. I get it. And some that just don't think they're important at all. And that's where I would disagree, but that's okay because we can agree to disagree. Back to the Rosa paint. I love this monopigment palette, but can I point out to you, they call it a monopigment set. But what the heck is this? Because this, which is cobalt turquoise, which they could have just used a single pigment for cobalt turquoise, I would expect it to be a single pigment in the monopigmented set. It's PB28 and PB36 according to the label. That's not a monopigment. That is a multi-pigment. What is it doing in this palette? This would be served better with a different color that actually is a monopigment. I've not looked at other people's reviews of this set to see, did something change? Why? I just don't understand why this is here. This is not a monopigmented color, and it's a beautiful color. Don't get me wrong. It is a beautiful color. They're both pigment blues, and it is a gorgeous blue turquoise, the cobalt turquoise. It granulates wonderfully, and that's why my asterisk here. Why? Why is it in this set? In my opinion, for what it's worth, it doesn't belong in this set. It is not a monopigmented color. That's what I paid for. A set of monopigments. So I think that is my one and only complaint, is that you shouldn't be including a multi-pigmented color in a monopigmented set. Don't know why it's here. Aside from that, how beautiful is this palette? Beautiful warm reds, really beautiful cool reds. At the same time, you've got warm and cool blue, some lovely greens. These two here, the one that's the PG8, just green, and their chromium oxide PG17. I love that chromium oxide. That is so, look at the granulation in that. That is such a pretty green. And again, here you can see on my bigger swatches, there's just green. Look at that mass tone that you can get, but yet look at how much you could lighten that up. And you could go even lighter than that, but I love it. That and this. The emerald green, or phthalo green, because it's PG7, is also pretty. It's more, and they named it emerald green, which I see why, because it definitely is an emerald, has an emerald hue to it, and but it is a phthalo green. The yellows, I like the selection that I have in yellow. PY35 here, the Cad Lemon is my coolest yellow, and it is definitely cooler than the rest. This right here, this PY110, is a beautiful warm yellow. And of course, we have 3 PY35, 3 of them. Maybe a little bit more variation in pigments, but I don't know if they have them in their line. So if they have more, I haven't looked into that. This is just reviewing this set. But if their line has more single pigment yellows, I would have preferred to have seen a couple of the other pigments show up here versus 3 versions of PY35. But aren't they lovely versions? And I don't mind painting with cadmium colors. I'm not eating my paints. I'm not putting my fingers in my mouth. It's not a powder. I'm not inhaling it, so I have no problems using it. Use your use your supplies responsibly. This set has a lot of cobalts and cadmiums in it, so that is something that if you don't like to use cadmium or cobalt colors, this set is not for you. You've got cad red, you've got cad yellows, you have cobalt blues. So I would say this would be a pass for you. I think this is a beautiful palette. I'm super happy that I made the choice to get it. Again, my only complaint, I mean, this isn't even a complaint. This is just something I think is good to know. Is the paint, when I layer, going to act more like what I would expect from a gouache? And I'm not saying that these are more opaque like gouache, because you can clearly see by the swatches that they are not by any means. However, their layers reactivate similar to how I would expect my gouache to reactivate. And a Princess Neptune is a very, very, very soft brush. This is not scratching up that surface when I go over there and causing more of that to happen. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that I'm happy that I know about it. And it would not deter me from using these paints at all. I don't think that it is a negative by any means. I just wish that was different and wasn't in here. Well, there's got to be more single pigments in their line. And again, this is my first experience with Rosa. I have not looked at the other sets, and I have not looked at their entire range. So I can't say, but I would have appreciated more variation in the single pigment yellows. And I definitely would have appreciated if the cobalt turquoise was a single pigment cobalt turquoise versus a dual, a multi-pigment placed in a monopigment set. I don't think has any place in this set. That's my 2 cents worth. So I'm going to pop another video up right here that you might like to watch next. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Rosa. Until next time, my friends, keep creating, and I'm going to see you in a video real soon. Perhaps this one right here. Come join me. Bye, guys.